Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this month's Food for Thought program. We have another insightful presentation planned for you all. But before we go ahead and get started, we're going to open with our poll. We've got Andrea Middleton, who is our systems and database administrator here at the League. She's going to be assisting us, but she's also running point on the Zoom and monitoring the Q&A in the chat. So a reminder that the chat is open and Ben will be taking questions throughout our program this morning. But before we jump into that, we want to know on opening day of Major League Baseball here in America, what is your favorite ballpark food? Got options from hamburgers, hot dogs, Cracker Jacks, nachos. We don't have brats on there, so that would be a good one and the other, but curious to know what your favorite ballpark food is.
Not being from Wisconsin, I did kind of group brats and hot dogs, but I realize the error that I made now.
They are different, aren't they?
Yeah.
All right, we'll go ahead and close that poll in three, two, one. We have a winner. So assuming that the brats and hot dogs are lumped together, I think it's a fair assessment that that's a clear winner amongst the group. Cracker Jack's a small number of you feel so strongly about them as a ballpark food. And we've got peanuts. Yeah, that's a good alternative. All right. Well, hopefully you all can catch a game this season. There's a whole season ahead of us, and it's a sign that spring is around the corner. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Zach Furlink, the Chief Operating Officer here at the League, and today we've got a great program lined up. Before we jump into our program, just a couple of announcements. The chat is open. Make sure you file your questions, and Andrea will ask them of our presenter as we go along. We are recording this program, and it'll be available on our League Food for Thought page and our YouTube page, so feel free to check it out, send it around to others in case it would be a resource for folks. Couple of announcements that we've got some links that'll be dropped in the chat. We're in the midst of hosting our regional roundtables around the state. We've got a couple of them left. Two of them I'll call out for folks that might be having new officials being placed following the spring elections next week. We've got Local Government Basics coming back, which is a format that some of you may have previously known under the Local Government 101. We've reformatted the program, made it a little more digestible, and it's part of a companion to an online learning series that we've launched here at the League. That's an online on-demand series. But we do have an in-person training planned for May and June, so check out the dates on that in the roundtable sense. And we also have our spring conference coming up, April 28th and 29th. League insureds get 2 free registrations, and that's not only registration, but it's also hotel rooms, so you can't beat it. So we hope to see you at the spring conference in the Dells, April 28th, 29th. We also have another Food for Thought, May 22nd. And then just this week, we launched the summer meeting of the chief executives, which will be taking place at Lambeau Field, July 30th and 31st. So if you're a mayor, administrator, manager, or village president, we'd love to see you join your peers this summer at Lambeau Field. So without further ado, we're going to jump into our program. Today we have Ben Jordan with the Wisconsin Local Technical Assistant Program, housed at University of Wisconsin-Madison, joining us. He will be discussing the ever-important responsibility of asset management. Said another way, to make sure you're maintaining your stuff. How's that for a technical term? And while not necessarily a comprehensive asset management program, meaning it's not all inclusive, there are other components that you certainly can consider when you're thinking asset management. Today, we're going to be talking managing your streets, bridges, highways, trails, and taking a deeper dive into one of the components, rating the pavements using a tool that Ben will talk about. Before I kick it to Ben, I want to highlight the local technical assistance program, and that it delivers dozens of workshops each year and offers 2 certificate programs. And Andrea's dropped the link in there. So if you've got folks on your staff, maybe some of up and comers that could benefit from working through either the Supervisory Academy or the Public Works Management Institute, 2 great resources to send folks to so they can bring back the skills and be equipped to potentially excel in their roles. The Local Transportation Assistant Program provides technical assistance to Wisconsin's local agencies. It distributes practical technical publications and maintains a library as well as the pavement management system that we're going to be talking about today for local roads. Ben has a career consisting of 35 years of experience in civil engineering and public works, and he's a former peer. He served in local government as a director of public works and a municipal engineer. So, Ben, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you, and you should be able to share your screen and get us started with today's program.
Thank you, Zach. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I do want to mention you're hearing our name of our organization as Wisconsin LTAP, and that is a name change that's happened within the last couple of years. Those of you who've seen us before may have remembered us as the Transportation Information Center. The name was changed to be a little more consistent with the name of the program on a national level, because there's a center like this in every state that provides training and technical assistance to local street and highway agencies. And so we changed our name to match up with the national program name, which is Local Technical Assistance Program. But it's the same group of folks from the TIC, hopefully the same practical focus that we've always had, and good resources to help you out managing pavement assets. And I will talk about some things other than pavement assets as well. We would prefer that questions go into the Q&A rather than the chat. And so I have the Q&A box open on the side, and we'll be trying to keep up with that. And so you can drop questions into that. The timing of this session is good in that it matches up with the American Society of Civil Engineers releasing their annual report card on infrastructure in the United States. And so this was an infographic from their report, and the report is like 250 plus pages. Came out earlier this week, so I haven't digested the whole thing. I'm sure many people have not, but this is a good summary, and I circled kind of the four largest asset classes that we deal with in local government. So roads, drinking water, stormwater, wastewater. Obviously, there are others. Public parks, solid waste are ones that most of us are going to have some involvement in. Bridges, we may have some involvement in as well. But I kind of highlighted these four because those are ones that are going to be common to everyone. And you can see nationwide, we've got a C- in drinking water, a D+ in roads, a D in stormwater, and a D+ in wastewater. And if I came home with that report card when I was a kid, I would have had some unhappy folks at home. And so hopefully none of us are happy about seeing that grade report for our infrastructure. There is a little history here. Unfortunately, when I clipped this, it came out a little bit blurry. But looking at those same assets over time, because ASCE has been doing this since 1988. Drinking water, the condition of that system nationwide has deteriorated over time from a B- to a C-, roads from a C+ to a D+. Stormwater just started getting broken out more recently, and so it's been at the D level. And then wastewater, you see the same thing, going down from a C to a D+. So that shows us trend-wise, we haven't been investing enough in our infrastructure, investing enough in those assets to improve the condition. And of course, this is, on a macro level, and we're going to try to get down to the local government level and the level in Wisconsin. I didn't see a new report card for Wisconsin specifically for 2025. This was the 2024 report. And you see from this, we're doing a little bit better in Wisconsin than the nationwide grades. I think except for wastewater, we're the same. There's some variation in some things that might contribute to this other than us just doing a better job. The available data on some of these things is a little bit different from state to state. We have more available data on the condition of our local roads in Wisconsin than some other states have. And we've had a history of 20+ years of collecting that information. And some of those things may help us show up better because we actually have inventories and we know the condition of some of those assets, where in some other states, the local system, that data may not be available. But it also indicates that we're doing a better job than the rest of the group. Still, if you came home with a report card with 3 Cs and a D+, we shouldn't be happy with that either. So, the other thing that was in the new report from ESC is looking at needs, and these are in billions of dollars, so you got to add a bunch of zeros to this. Needs and funding, federal level funding and funding gap. And you can see significant gaps in funding on all of the same asset classes that we talked about in the grade report. So we're going to talk a little bit about infrastructure and asset management of our infrastructure. And I put a few photos here to kind of represent the types of assets that we're dealing with in local government and cities and villages. These are ones that are visible. I can take a picture of them and you can see them, driving down the road, walking down the street every day. There's other assets that are hidden, and we'll talk about that difference as well. So you have bridges, you have your street pavement assets, you have your water utility system, you have on the lower right, you have stormwater, and you're seeing an inlet, which is, a place where water is taken into that system. And so that's visible on the surface. There's obviously a lot of that system that's buried under the ground. The same with the water system. All of the distribution piping is buried under the ground. You see the fire hydrants, you see the storage tanks, you see your treatment facilities, your well house, but there's a great deal of that infrastructure investment that's buried under the ground. And there's a little depiction of those things that are under the ground. So we have the storm sewer system. So what we saw in the last photo was just this piece in the curb up at the top, but all of the piping to carry that stormwater from that curb line to the receiving stream is buried underground, and we have to do some things to look at the condition of that and plan for the rehabilitation or replacement of that piping system. The same thing is true for the sanitary sewer system. There's a drain on the sink in your house, there's a toilet you flush, but all the piping that takes all of that waste away, you don't see it all. You see a manhole cover in the street, and that's the only part of it that's visible to you until it reaches the treatment plant. And then obviously the treatment plant facility has buildings and equipment that we can visually see, but a lot of this system is buried underground as well. And so that's one of the challenges. We have a significant amount of our assets that we manage as a local government. There are these buried assets that go unnoticed by the public, and people assume that they're being taken care of. They assume that they will work when they want them to work, which is every day. They always, you want to drink water, you want to be able to flush the toilet. And so there's an assumption that these are being maintained and that they're going to work. And when we have problems and issues and when they become top of mind to the public is when they do not work. And so our job in local government, and this falls to your public works department, your utilities department, to make sure that we invest in these assets in maintenance and in rehabilitation so that they function properly and continue to function properly over a long life. So I guess if we're going to talk about assets and talk about managing assets first, we need definitions of what an asset is. And if you go to the dictionary, which I understand if you get into a lawsuit and the documents don't define something well, the judge will go to the dictionary and say, well, what's the common meaning of this word? And Merriam-Webster Dictionary says an asset is an item of value owned. Our guidance for, a lot of our guidance for asset management comes from the Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB, and in Statement 4, they defined assets as resources with present service capacity that a government presently controls. So that actually goes a little bit beyond owned. So there could be other forms of control where that's considered an asset of the local government other than ownership. So it's a little more specific to our purposes. GASB 34 is a statement that's been around a really long time, and you probably weren't expecting to have an engineer come on and talk about the Government Accounting Standards Board, but this is really what started driving us toward asset management. We've always done management of specific asset classes. Pavement management was a discussion before this GASB 34 requirement was out there. And there were some federal requirements that at one point were going to come into effect before that time, requiring local government to have pavement management systems, which is part of the reason we developed systems at our center to share with local governments in Wisconsin for pavement asset management. So that history goes back before GASB 34. But GASB 34 says you've got to, track these assets and account for the deterioration of these assets essentially. And it gave two methods. And one was primarily an accounting method, which is still a method and still used quite a bit, where we identify the original cost of the asset. So when it was built new, or if we've replaced it once, it would have been the cost at the time we replaced it. And then we, excuse me, I hit an extra button there and went ahead. And then we need to set an expected life of that asset. That might be the design life. As an engineer, from a design standpoint, you're supposed to identify a design life for an asset when you're making decisions about, the materials that are going to be used, the thickness of materials, the strength of materials, type materials, the type of coatings to protect it, or corrosion protection or other things. You're thinking about, well, how long am I designing this to last? And some typical numbers might be in the range of like 20 to 30 years typically for a street pavement, although we could do that 50 years or more. And we would have to invest more initially dollar-wise to get that design life. 50 years would not be an unusual number for an underground sewer or sanitary sewer, storm sewer, water main. Although we know that those assets exist in our systems for longer than that. And so it may be that we need to use a longer life than that design life in our first method approach, our accounting method. Because what we're going to do is over that lifetime, we're going to depreciate that asset. And theoretically, when the value of that asset depreciates to zero, that should also match up with the end of life of that asset. The other method that's allowed, and it's specifically talked about for assets that make up a network. So things like your water distribution system, your sanitary sewer collection system, your stormwater system, your streets, they're all networks. And so they very well fit into this method where we, as an agency, we establish what is an minimum acceptable condition, and we maintain the asset, through maintenance activities, through rehabilitation activities, to that condition or better. And so that involves us having some inventory information and some condition assessment of the asset. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. So, and this is some of the language out of GASB 34 describing that. So it says infrastructure assets, part of a network, aren't required to be depreciated as long as you do the things we just talked about. You manage using an asset management system, and there's some recent kind of proposed language that hasn't been adopted that may kind of soften that a little bit, because people have been interpreting asset management system to mean you have to have a computerized system to track this asset. And it looks like some of the guidance that's going to come out is going to say, hey, wait a minute, no, we didn't quite mean you had to use a computer to do that, but you needed to have the characteristics of an asset management system. So where we document that the assets are being preserved at the condition level or above. So basically what we talked about in the previous slide. And so this is some of the things that are in a document that was posted in September of last year for comments, with comments due in January from GASB. So this isn't adopted language, but some additional guidance they're considering. Should periodically review and adjust the useful life of infrastructure assets if you're using that first method, the accounting method that was talked about. there were concerns expressed, and this is, these are both their language out of this document. Concerns expressed that a significant number of governments have capital assets, including infrastructure assets, that are being reported as fully depreciated. So reported as having zero value, but they're still in service. So we've got that mismatch between um, the book value and the actual life of the asset. Because if the asset is still in service, um, we have not used all its useful life. Although we may be putting a lot of maintenance dollars into continuing to keep that asset in service, and we may have been better served in the long run in terms of being most effective with our dollars in replacing that asset versus maintenance of the asset. But they're saying, well, if you still have it on the books as an asset and you're still using it, it shouldn't really have depreciated down to zero. So there needs to be some adjustment made there. So that's one of the proposed items. And there's some discussion also about what's called in GASB 34 the modified approach, which is the approach with the network assets where we are evaluating condition. And it basically clears up. We should have a process in place to update inventory. So we need an inventory of the assets. And condition assessment of those assets, and estimates of annual amounts to preserve the assets at the condition level established. And so we're going to talk about how we do this with pavements and some tools we have for that. And then we'll talk a little bit about some other classes of assets and how we might start thinking about those where we don't have some of those tools available. So it says that the GASB 34 document talked about collecting assessment information every 3 years, and this proposed guidance is reinforcing that and saying that we do need to continue to do that and to continue to preserve the assets at or above the condition level established. And again, established and disclosed by the government. So you as a local government agency say this is an acceptable minimum condition level, and then we are going to maintain to that level or above. And of course, being able to set that level gives you some flexibility, but there are some other things that constrain you. Certainly, the public is interested in, and I'm sorry, I kind of went ahead a little further than I planned to. Things are moving around on me here where I don't want them to. So I'm going to try to go backwards here and then go forward again. I think I accidentally skipped over this one. And so I'm going to do what we were talking about, and then I'm going to jump back to that. I apologize for that. So the things that limit us a little bit on just setting that condition really low is obviously we have the public who expects certain levels of service from us. So that may vary from community to community on what's expected, but we do have our duty to our public to try to preserve things in a condition that's acceptable to them. And there are also safety and liability issues associated with not maintaining assets. So the other reason we're going to, kind of be controlled on what those minimum levels are is we don't want to create unsafe conditions. And so those are things to think about in conjunction with these statements as well. So I am going to go back to this one because I don't believe I covered this. I think I somehow jumped over it. In the draft guidance, they talk about some clarification of what infrastructure assets are, the things that we can use this modified approach, and that includes things that have multiple components that are part of a network, and we've kind of talked about that already. Utilized for a particular public service, and it says buildings should be included if they're part of the network, but it's saying that you don't have to, you don't use this method for standalone buildings. You don't use this method for vehicles. You use this method for network types of assets. So it's trying to clarify that a little bit for people. So we talked about this and this one as well. And then the other question would be, well, how does GASB and their guidance even apply to us. It's a little bit indirect. It's not like there's a law that directly says thou shalt use, GASB 34, um, but there is administrative rules through Department of Revenue that talk about all towns, cities, villages with population of 25,000 or more are have to have financial statements that conform to generally accepted accounting principles. And generally accepted accounting principles mean those governmental accounting and financial reporting principles promulgated by GASB. And so the things we're talking about here come into play with all of that as well. And then the other thing that really drives this is, these accounting practices are also an expectation for people who are involved in analyzing bonds, people who are relying on information on the government finances when purchasing bonds. So if you are issuing bonds to finance infrastructure, there's an expectation with that you're going to be following these requirements. And so those are really the two places where we're kind of locked into doing this approach. And so we kind of started getting into, well, if we're going to manage these assets and manage them effectively, what do we need to do? And so this is generalized, not talking about a specific class of assets, but we need to know what we own. And that sounds kind of basic, but I think that every local agency could probably think of a class of assets where we really don't know what we own. We don't have a complete inventory of that asset. We need to know the location of those assets. If we have a GIS system, we probably have the assets that we have inventoried geographically located in our GIS maps. If we don't have that kind of system, we need to have some, address description or other description that's going to say where is that asset located? What condition is the asset in? And then, what is its full expected life or its remaining useful life, are two approaches that you can take to that. Some things that we may need to know in kind of figuring that life out and the remaining life is, when was it initially constructed? Was it reconstructed at some point? Was there major capital investment in rehabilitating that asset to extend its life? Maintenance, when was maintenance last done? What were the costs of these activities? What were the costs of the original construction? What were the costs of the reconstruction? We should have some understanding of how the assets deteriorate, because within a class of assets, we can have variation in the rate of deterioration. So, if we're doing the accounting approach, we're going to take a whole class of assets and we're going to say, well, we're going to depreciate water main over a 60-year period. But that doesn't mean that every pipe in the ground is going to deteriorate at the same rate. And you may have something that needs to be replaced or have major rehabilitation done before you get to that point that you put on the books of 60 years. And you may have some things that extend beyond it. And so when we go to the other approach where we're analyzing condition, we're going to see variation in condition of assets that could have been built at the same time because of use, because of exposure to heavy loads, exposure to the environment. So we're going to see a variation in deterioration. And what is that minimum condition level? And that's something that probably is missing from a lot of our programs, is an establishment of that condition level and publishing that and saying this is what we're committed to, because that's what the GASB documents say we're supposed to be doing. And then, so based on all these things, based on condition, based on the expected life, when are we going to need to invest in replacement or significant upgrade of that facility? So that starts feeding into our capital planning. So a number of years ago, I was able to write an article for the League called Back of the Napkin Asset Management. And I don't know if it's this particular photo, but this was one of the photos that I took when I was looking for a photo to illustrate this. And the whole idea was, And this is, I put it in quotes this time, asset management, because from a GASB definition, this would not be asset management. But if you don't have asset management um, programs in place for a category of assets, but you still like to quickly know without hiring a consultant, without gathering a lot of data, quickly have an idea, are we even in range on keeping up with the condition of this class of assets? This is just a quick and dirty suggestion of how to check on that. And literally, you can do the calculation on a cocktail napkin. Of course, this I used a coffee cup because I didn't know if, when we did the article, I didn't know if they wanted me putting whiskey on the rocks in the photo. So, and by the way, I couldn't respond to the poll at the beginning, but I was wondering if beer is considered a food. And maybe folks have thoughts on that because that certainly is a traditional ballpark staple as well. So with this kind of the back of the napkin approach, I used water main because it's pretty easy to understand. It's a pipe in the ground and we can quantify how much of it there is by length in feet or miles, some measurement of length. And so typically in a city, somebody in your utility staff or your public works staff is going to know how many miles of that pipe we have underground. That's going to be a known number. And then in your documents, because in most cases you're going to have done this work by contract, you're going to have contracts that were approved for a contractor to come in and replace water main. Now, maybe you do it with your own forces, and so then you're going to need to go into maintenance records to look at what was replaced. But each year for the last 5 years, how many miles have we replaced? And so this example, I did not use real data in this one. I used reasonable but made up data to make the numbers come out pretty even. But you can do this with real data, and sometimes you'll get longer replacement cycles than this. So if we're replacing 2 miles per year, which seems like a lot, that's over 10,000 feet of water main. We're only replacing 0.5% annually. So we have a 200-year replacement cycle for that asset class. We know from experience that we can't expect 200 years of life out of that asset class. If we doubled that replacement rate and we went to 4 miles a year, and we do the calculation, we get to 1% replaced annually, which gets us into a 100-year replacement cycle. We're starting to get into range on this asset if we get to that point. But if we're only doing 2 miles a year, we're not going to be in range on continuing to maintain that asset at a certain condition level. And so we haven't even analyzed condition at all. All we've looked at in this quick example is how many miles do we have? How many miles have we replaced? You could do the same thing with pavement. You could do the same thing with vehicles and equipment. That doesn't meet the GASB guidelines, but it gives you some information very quickly. Obviously, to do asset management as described, you're going to need an inventory. So we're going to talk about a pavement example. So we need to know, what's the centerline length, what's the width, what's the thickness of the material, what's the base course material that's underneath it. And we may want to know how much traffic it carries. If we have information on how much heavy truck traffic it carries, that's going to be helpful too. So there's a lot of data we'd like to attach to that segment of pavement and every segment of pavement. We'd like to have some information about how the pavements deteriorate. We could develop our own information after we've done a series of evaluations over time, and we could actually get information on how our pavements deteriorate. In the example we'll look at for the tool that is available through WSDOT, there is a standard deterioration curve that's based on some statewide average information that is used to figure out how pavements can be expected to deteriorate. We have an evaluation system. There's a simple free one that's called PACER, which we'll mention. You can use a more sophisticated system if you wish as well. And then, how do we estimate useful life? How do we plan for rehabilitation, replacement, and then how do we transfer that into our capital planning? So I mentioned a rating system for The pavement assets, it's called PACER, P-A-S-E-R. This is a 1 to 10 visual rating system. Ratings of pavement assets are actually required. These are submitted to Wisconsin DOT every 2 years. They're required by December 15th in the odd numbered year. And actually, the the requirement is just that it's done within the last 2 years. So some people think, oh, I've got to go out in the fall of the odd numbered year and do this. No, you just have to have done it within the 2 years and report it by December 15th of the odd year. In my view, it makes a lot more sense to be looking at that asset like this time of year because maybe it will inform some changes in some maintenance that you need to do, or even in some of your plans for contracted maintenance or rehabilitation. And so really, this is a good time of year to be looking at those. But it's a 1 to 10 rating system, with 10 being a new pavement, 1 being a completely failed pavement. The booklet has some visual photos of different conditions, descriptions of conditions, of different types of cracking and other distresses that would be observed on those pavements. I would like to give a little bit of feedback on what we're seeing from some of those ratings. I don't actually receive them. The DOT receives them. The DOT doesn't use them to allocate funding, but they do look at them to look for trends. They look at them to try to discern what the needs are in the local system. Sometimes that can be difficult because some of the shared revenue we get through GTA, we don't use that all in ways that improve the pavement and extend the life of the pavement. So if they're looking at ratings and looking at the unmet need based on ratings, they're not seeing some of the other things that we do associated with drainage and other improvements that are going to affect the road but aren't directly related to the pavement. But some things that I've heard in discussions with the DOT, some things I've observed from going out and looking at pavements with local agency folks and looking up what they submitted as a rating and then visually seeing the same road. Rate based on observed condition, because we do see some mismatches between the numerical ratings that are received and the actual condition. So one of the ways I describe that is don't wish rate. You can imagine somebody who's responsible for the pavements in your system, and they have a limited budget and they're trying to make things work. They may not want to report to you that a pavement is in a pavement condition rating of 2 or 3 and needs reconstruction. And they're hoping that they can get away with just a maintenance surface treatment on this road. And so, I'm not saying this happens all the time, but I have seen it where the rating gets pushed up to a 5 because a rating of 5 would match up with doing that maintenance treatment. But that does us a disservice because we're not reporting accurately what our actual conditions are. We're hiding some issues there, and we're reporting to the state better condition than we actually have, which means we're underreporting our need and then underreporting the gap between funding and need, which we don't want to be doing. Another thing that I've heard, I have not directly been involved in prioritizing applications for award on grants, but I've heard some DOT feedback that they've occasionally received grant applications, and when you apply to the state DOT for grants, they do ask for the PACER pavement condition rating, where there's been a significant mismatch between the described conditions. So you have a narrative part of an application for a grant that describes the road and describes issues maybe related to safety, related to pavement condition, related to heavy truck traffic and damage, whatever it is. And then they go to look at the PACER pavement rating, and it's showing a PACER pavement rating of 7, which wouldn't be consistent with any of the things you just described in your narrative. And they go, well, what are these folks doing? And that application may go to the bottom of the pile because of that mismatch. And even in analysis of the data, had some recent discussions with Wisconsin DOT where we're trying to look at some data and maybe do some updating to deterioration curves, making them more relatable to different pavement types. Just some things where we're seeing pavements that are 7 or more years old, according to information that people have put in, but they're rated a 10, which is a rating that you would have on a new pavement. I know from a lot of experience evaluating pavements that at year 7, that pavement is not going to still rate a 10, but we're seeing some things reported that way. So looking at looking at the ratings and going back and making sure that we are actually reporting condition in a way that effectively expresses the condition. There is a tool for us to report the condition, to put our inventory into the system, and to do some 5-year planning as well. And it's called Whistler. And this is just a page showing the inventory. And then from that, it also has the ability to give reports about the condition frequency. And so you can look at your system and it'll show you right now what percent of your system is in different categories of condition. And you can customize these bins, these categories. So this agency, everything 1 to 3, they're going to reconstruct. And so they have those all in one category. 4s would be an overlay strategy. So they have that rating separated out. 5s to 6s would be a surface treatment like a chip seal or slurry seal. 7s would be crack sealing. 8 to 10 would be no action. So that's how they've sorted those out. And you can see almost 30% of their system, and this was real data from an agency in Wisconsin, 30% of their system needed reconstruction. So that's pretty significant. And then another part of that, that tool allows you to create a 5-year budget plan. So you put budget dollar amounts in for each year for 5 years, and then you ask it to create a report, and it will use a prioritization that's going to favor low cost early maintenance because we're most cost effective when we invest dollars early in the life. So it is going to be biased toward that, but it is still going to pick up some of the roads needing reconstruction, but it's not going to take a worst first approach and dump all the money into those worst condition roads because we know that's not the most cost effective way to manage this asset class. So from that, we put 5 years worth of budget in there, and it has all of our pavement segments and it has their current condition. And we can also, it has default cost data, but we can actually update that cost data to our actual costs and the type of treatment that we would use for different rating types. And it will give you a distribution of here we are today. It's a different set of data, so it's not the same one we just looked at. Percent of system in these different conditions, and then based on the budget we proposed, what percent of the system will be in different conditions at 5 years. And you can see they're putting enough into this system that they're actually increasing the new pavements or newly overlaid pavements percentage over that 5 years. And here is backlog of work, and they show a reduction in backlog. So it can show you that. And you could run a series of these, but first here's just, it will give you an output of the suggested roads, what year they should be worked on, and what type of treatment should be done. And then that also can be dumped out into a spreadsheet because you could tweak things and move things around because you may have other priorities based on when you're going to be doing utility improvements on the same road. You may have a priority because of the type of land use that a road serves. You may have other reasons why you want to move something around. So you can output it and adjust it as well. Right. And for some reason we froze up on this one. There we go. It can also map this information. So you could have that 5-year plan and you could map visually where those roads are on your system, which can be nice from a presentation standpoint. So one of the ways this can be used in some of your discussions about, what are we going to do with our pavements and what's our plan for the next 5 years? You could use this tool, which is a free tool available to all the local governments. It's online, it's web-based. You already put data into it on condition, and you already have inventory in there. And so here's a suggested approach. Run a do-nothing budget. And the way to do a do-nothing budget is you put $1 in for each of the 5 years. A reduced budget, maybe 25% less than what you did last year. One that is normal, which is like last year's plus a CPI factor or however you might do that. And then one that's larger, maybe not outrageously larger, not like you're trying to figure out how to take care of all your backlog in a year because that would have a huge budget impact. And then you can run each of those alternatives and look at how they compare. And then from there, you may use that to identify one of those that is your best choice, or you may see that something in between your current budget and an increased budget might be reasonable. So you might do another run somewhere in between to get down to one that is a good proposal. And so here's examples of those outputs. A do nothing showed increase in backlog. You're showing decreases in conditions 7 through 10, which are our roads in best condition, because we stopped investing in the roads, and we can see that impact over 5 years. We reduce it from our current budget, but still put $250,000 a year in. We are reducing backlog somewhat, but we are having some positive impact on condition. But then we can look at let me go back to that one. But you're seeing not really much impact on the roads in the poorest condition. A little bit of the 3 and 4 condition were improved, but we're still the 1s and 2s, the completely failed pavements, we aren't having any impact on. If we start increasing that budget a little more, if we did over our previous number to 500,000, we certainly have impact again, increasing the number of conditions 7, 8, 9, and 10. But we also start reducing those pavements in the poorest condition, the 1s to 2s, and continue to have more impact on the condition 3 to 4, which are also ones that need significant rehabilitation. And then, the normal year for them was, in this example, was $330,000. And so it shows what that is. And kind of from that, looking at those options and looking at what was reasonable, came to a conclusion to propose a budget of $400,000. So between the previous number and the larger trial, the $500,000 trial, we got to another number where we're still having some impact on the 1s to 2. And the question about, does Whistler differentiate between capital and maintenance? Yes, it will split it out and give you capital and maintenance expenditures separately. It's going to look at things like the crack sealing and the surface treatment as maintenance, and it will give you those separately. So, that is, and I think I'm getting a little close on time, and so certainly jump in with questions, because I do want to make sure that we answer your questions. But I will touch briefly on other assets. So the roads are easy for me to talk about because I have a tool to offer you, no cost, that can be used, that we've put a lot of data into already as local agencies. But some of the other assets, we don't have those tools. Some of those assets are buried and we can't see them. And so what do we do with those? We can do visual inspection of some underground assets. The sanitary sewers, the sanitary sewers and the storm sewers are not under pressure. And so in times of normal flow or low flow, we can put a camera in there and do a visual inspection of those, and we can do a visual inspection of manhole structures. And so that's a very common way to evaluate condition of those assets. For things like water main that are under pressure, there are starting to be some tools out there that say that they can be basically inserted into a pressure pipe under pressure and move through the system and do things like characterize roughness of the inside surface and the thickness of the wall. So starting to be some things that can get you some of that type of data, but they're not that commonly used at this point. So not experimental. They are out on the market, but it's just not in common use. So some of the things we do is we look at failures. Every time there's a failure in the system, we should be recording data about that, recording the location, recording the type of break that occurred, the depth it was at, the soils that are surrounding it, any of the factors that could affect why those breaks occurred should be recorded. And this is a trend actually just on the number of breaks per year from some data from a number of years, not including recent years, from City of Madison. And you can see an upward trend. But they also map all of their breaks in their GIS system. They map the type of pipe material, and they start to look for trends on materials that are showing a lot of breaks, and also trends on locations, because you can see this dark red material, which is unlined sand cast iron water main, which is in older parts of the city. There are some areas where that has not failed at all, and then there are other places with the same material where you're seeing significant numbers of breaks. And it may have to do with the soil conditions. It may have to do with some things that were not done well in original construction. Um, there are a lot of environmental factors and other factors that can make the same material perform differently in one place than another. So we map those conditions and we try to identify trends and identify problem areas through that. Other assets, vehicles. Typical approach is we say, here's an expected useful life of these vehicles. Let's set up a schedule. A 1-ton truck is going to last for 8 to 10 years. So let's plan 8 to 10 years out to replace that. A loader is going to last 18 years. Let's plan to replace that. And so that gives you can do that on a spreadsheet, and you have the value to replace it currently. And then you'd put an inflation factor in for the out years. And you basically just add the expected life to the year it was last replaced, and that's your next scheduled year. So in this case, this agency is saying a police car is 3 years. You notice that last slide said 5 years. I'd be more inclined to the 3 than the 5. Some other approaches to that, a scorecard. So this looks at the age, but then it also looks at mileage, or in some cases, you'd use hours for equipment. It looks at annual maintenance costs. So how much dollar expenditure did we have to maintain that asset? If we have one that hasn't met its age, but we're dumping a lot of dollars into maintenance and repair, that's an indication that we should prioritize the replacement of that asset. And there's an approach that strictly looks at that maintenance and repair and says, when maintenance and repair gets to 30% of the residual value of the piece of equipment, we should start thinking about replacing it. It becomes a candidate for replacement. That approach would get us replacing a lot of these equipment assets much earlier than we do currently. The availability of the condition information is going to vary by asset type. So we know for the, WISDOT, for the pavements, we've got an asset management tool. We've got a rating system. So we're pretty well covered there. The other classes, we're really going to need to identify those approaches ourselves. Some of the associations like American Water Works Association may be of some help with that also, but I don't have a ready-made tool to hand to you for those assets. But it would be beneficial to start looking at, rather than just managing those assets based on the accounting depreciation, to identify ways to evaluate condition of those assets and to start to track that condition, track trends on that condition over time, so that we can manage those as a network of assets as well, and make informed decisions about where in that network we invest our dollars, rather than just looking at the age of the system. And I think we do that to some extent, but it's not nearly as formalized as it is on the pavement assets. And I'm not seeing questions in the Q&A, but I hope.
There was one, I'm sorry, or maybe you just answered it. Like, can the Whistler tool differentiate budgets between capital?
Yeah, I did
Okay.
answer that one verbally. And so I think someone probably marked that as answered. Now I see the under answered. Yeah. And then the other one was just a comment on the program. Someone had to leave a little early who was appreciating the program, and thank them for that. And so we have a few minutes to talk about really any of your questions you have about your infrastructure and infrastructure assets, or anything else that, while you have me here, anything else that you think I can help you with answering a question.
Ben, there's a question in the chat. If you have a general spreadsheet that you'd share with others for other asset classes.
I do not. And what I would suggest for each asset class, one of the first places to go to would be the industry association related to that asset class. So American Water Works Association for water. I'm aware of one spreadsheet they have that really is looking at assets within more of like a treatment plant facility. So it has, based on a survey they did, it has some useful lives of pumps and motors and electrical panels and things you might find in a treatment plant. They don't have something similar that I'm aware of for the underground assets. There's EPA guidance in a small water system asset management manual that talks about a 40-year life for water main. I think that's too low. Um, from an engineering standpoint, we generally use 50 years as a number. And so there are kind of different things scattered around, but I don't have a spreadsheet sitting on my computer that I could just send out to someone. So, the Water Environment Federation would be a resource to look at for the wastewater and stormwater assets. Stormwater is interesting because you saw that even in the ASCE report card, they didn't even report on those assets separately until a couple of years ago. Stormwater has become a much bigger issue. It's become not just a flood control system, but over the last 2 decades, we've become very focused on water quality. We're all involved in having stormwater general permits for our storm sewer system. Many agencies, because of the additional burden of the stormwater quality aspects of it, have gone to having stormwater utilities. But because that asset class hasn't been on the radar screen as long, I don't think there is many good resources for asset management for that class of assets. The vehicle fleet assets, I kind of provided a couple approaches there, which can be pretty easily adapted to a spreadsheet. You can also find spreadsheets from agencies with the kind of calendar approach that you saw. In fact, one of the things I showed was a spreadsheet from an agency. I certainly could share that example if someone wanted to send me an email. I have my email on the last slide here, I believe. If I go to that, I do. Email, office phone, mobile phone. The only caveat on me giving you the mobile phone is that we have an implicit agreement that you will not call me at bar time to settle a bar bet about infrastructure. All right. Other than that, you can feel free to use that when you have questions as well, because we work remotely a fair amount. And so the office phone does forward to my computer, but the mobile phone is always on me and you can always reach me there. And my email address at the bottom as well. And so certainly if you're looking for a particular asset class and some other resources, you could do kind of a one-on-one follow-up with me and we can see if we can find the particular ones you're looking for.
Excellent, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us today and everyone for taking part in our Food for Thought series. We've got another edition appearing on May 22nd, which will be on the league theme of teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work, as the saying goes. But we also have a number of conferences and events coming up. We've got our spring conference right around the corner, taking place in a few weeks. We'd love to see you there. If you're a league insured, you get 2 registrations comped, as well as your hotels covered, is included with the offer from League Insurance. And then we've got some regional roundtables. So we'd love to see you at a future meeting. Any further questions? Ben's information is in the chat. So feel free to go ahead and download the chat. There's an ellipsis right above the type your message box where you can save it and have access to the links after our webinar. This is available on our website, so feel free to take a look there. It'll be posted here in a couple of days. Andrea, any final comments, or Ben, anything further from you?
Nothing further from me other than to thank everybody for your time and your participation today.
That's all I've got. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.